Thank you, everybody. Awesome, applause. I was going to make a joke about what's in your wallet, then I saw that it was on the paper, so I didn't have to. So I'm not going to be pitching any products or showing any demos, but I'm going to talk about a really exciting topic. Oh, thank you, in front row. Talk about a really exciting topic, which is continuous integration and delivery in a regulated environment, which we all know is very easy to do, isn't contentious at all, right? Show of hands, people that are dealing with continuous integration, it's easy. Hands that it's easy. Hands that it's a little bit of a pain. Yep, a lot of people. So a lot of people are talking about continuous delivery. We are, places I've been, have been. But I want to start with why even bother with continuous delivery? Set the stage for why this can be a little bit of a challenge. If you ask the CIO of a company, why continuous delivery, you're going to get an answer. You might get an answer like, I want to get products out to market more quickly. If you ask the CFO, you'll get a different answer, right? You'll get an answer which is, I want to save money. If you ask an engineering team, they don't want to deal with a lot of the nonsense that it takes to get code into production. The list goes on. You ask product, they should tell you they want to test hypotheses really quickly. The reason that this is important is, depending on whom you ask, you get a different answer, which means there are different expectations around continuous delivery, continuous integration. So when you're walking around in meetings, talking to people about the efforts, what you want to accomplish, you have to keep in context that there are different opinions about what it looks like at the end. I didn't cop out and not give you guys a definition. So what is continuous delivery anyway? Who here has had at least one meeting where you've tried to debate with your teammates or other parts of the company what continuous delivery is? Show of hands again. People have talked about it? I don't believe the people that aren't raising their hands. Well, I went online to look and see, what is continuous delivery? Find a definition. So I found a definition on Wikipedia. We always trust Wikipedia, because Wikipedia knows everything. I'll read it to you. Continuous delivery is a software engineering approach in which teams keep producing valuable software in short cycles and ensure that the software can be reliably released at any time. So I gave you already that there are certain expectations that you get from different parts of your business. Does this really help answer those questions, right? I don't think so. I think it's a great verbiage, but what is release? What does that mean? What does reliably mean? There's a lot of questions here. So this really isn't helpful. We ran into this challenge, Capital One. I run into this challenge other places. I try to look at this a little bit differently. So let's take out the continuous for a moment. For delivery, do we agree? I'm going to do a show of hands. If you don't agree with me, it might ruin it, but it's okay. Show of hands. Is our job really, when we are building software, to quickly, predictably, and with quality, deliver that software to customers? Show of hands. Is that kind of what we're in the business of doing? So if we all agree, and that was actually good, better than a continuous delivery agreement, if we agree with that, then continuously delivering is really no more than more quickly, more predictably, and with more quality, delivering software features and products to our customers. But there's one little added catch. This is automating every step we can of the process. Right? There's a journey of automation. The reason that I phrase it this way is, again, the definition of continuous delivery is difficult to get your head around. The expectations around what continuous delivery is from the different parts of the company that we're dealing with are challenging. At a regulated environment in which you can't make mistakes because there are laws, there's compliance, there's auditing, there are things that you must do, particularly with people's money, that get in the way. But if you lay it out that way, it makes it a little bit easier. Well, that's great. I think people are going to agree, yes, we should be automating these processes. But it doesn't seem that we were able to really get, in a lot of places, as far as we want, as easily as we would like to. And we will have people, if you haven't hit this, I'm not going to do a show of hands for this one, but if you haven't had a person tell you this can't work in a regulated environment, somebody will at some point in time tell you there is some process, there is something that prevents you from being able to continuously deliver code, or at least to automate many steps of that process in a continuously integrated environment. And I'm going to walk through these. I think there are 3 things that are in our way, but I want to put this perspective on there. I think that you can do this. I think you can actually do it easily in the sense of technology, you can do this. But I think that there's a non-tech aspect that gets in our way. And this might be provocative. If you aren't automating these steps, I don't think you really are compliant. And this is harsh, because we have checkboxes galore. We have compensating controls, hundreds of them, thousands of them. A lot of these are manual. A lot of these require stylus, et cetera. We feel better. Our auditors are happier. That's their job. If there's auditors here, I'm not angry at you. Don't throw anything at me. But auditors are happy. But does that really make us compliant? And I would argue it isn't. So what are the 3 things that I think are stopping us? The first is that we built silos to maintain order. Info security is really important. By the way, I'm not advocating federation of the entire model, but hear this part through. So we built silos to maintain order. We decided that info security was really important. Our lines of business, they need to be secure, so we will have a central silo of info security. We'll have one for data integrity. We'll have one for our cloud. We'll have one for enterprise architecture. And those groups, those silos, they'll be accountable for making sure what we can and what we can't do so that we can remain compliant. We trust people more than machines. This one's fascinating to me. If an algorithm makes a mistake 1 out of 1,000 times, we flip out. My wife reminds me how many times I make mistakes, right? And it is much more than that, like 1 out of 1,000. But we still trust people. We think that human beings, for some reason, are going to do a better job than the computers. And we have bad controls that we've put in place over years. And they were put in place in some cases for the right reason, but they might not be applicable any longer. But we have put so much weight on these that it's hard for us to break through. So let me walk through these 3 things. I'm not going to give you a silver bullet on what you can do to address it. I'll give you a perspective, because I believe that we're all going to be facing this conversation, whether you're a big company or a small company, and perhaps this helps you get through some of the log jams you might hit, or at least come to a much better solution at the end. And just out of curiosity, do those things resonate with people? Are you guys seeing this? I'm seeing nods, good, versus the hands. More nods than hands. So silos of accountability. We created this silo. We'll pick again. I'm not going to pick on info security. Let's pick on data integrity. We created this silo, and this is going to make us more secure, because now we have one central place that we can go. They will always check off every step of the process. It will absolutely add complexity to your process. Most of us, particularly in the bigger businesses, there is not one group that you go to. It's 10, it could be 15, it could be 20. Every one of those handoffs between these different teams, every time there isn't that continuity of thought about what you're trying to accomplish, you add entropy. This is causing failures that we just don't even see. So if you're sitting in a meeting and someone says, it's okay to have multiple people that are checking things off during that process, I would argue, I don't think it is. And I think that if you put automation in place and you think about how you automate those steps, you actually are putting yourself in a much better position than if you have to have those numerous handoffs. Some places I've seen will have different review boards. You come to those review boards, you talk things through, and you walk. I'm not advocating that, again, that those groups shouldn't exist, but I think it should be a slightly different model. I think it should be something where people are coming to you, where you have a group that understands what you're building. People are sitting in a room, where they're delegates, et cetera, so that you can make sure that you are not missing the entire context when you're building an application. And our manual process is good. So when you're testing an application, there will be inevitably somebody that says, I need to make sure the application really works. I'm going to have somebody test it. It's really complicated from a software. It's hard for us to automate this, whether it is going to be just testing the UI or testing from a security perspective. There is no human way that even if we hired 10,000 people to test our code, that we will hit every permutation, that we will catch everything. And what's interesting about that is, think about some of the approval processes. I don't know where everyone is from, can't see all the badges, but I am pretty familiar with how most financial institutions have an approval process. An email pops up in your inbox and says, one of your employees wants to use library X. And you go, I have 800 emails in my inbox, approved. I trust them. You don't read it, right? There you go, the truth's coming out, right? You don't read it, you don't review it, you just hit go. And this is a human process. And humans make mistakes, right? What's worse about this, though, is we do have compensating controls where a human being, and this is actually related to the second one, which is separation of duties, but where a human being is responsible for that step, because we feel better. As long as a human being gets that out into production, we'll be better. Well, there's a little bit of a magic thing that happens here, which is you might not actually catch the problems. So again, there's this false sense of security about, yes, we feel really good about this because there is now this manual process in place, but there's errors, and you didn't see those errors. When you're having conversations on this one's a pretty interesting one, because there is a certain pushback that you will get that people understand the systems better than anyone else. I'm going to speak for me, being in a certain situation where if I want to deploy code, there might be teams that will make a claim if something were to go wrong. They're the ones that can react more quickly. They understand how the system works, and they can fix it. But one other thing about manual processes here is the tools are changing very, very, very quickly, and the speed at which we're releasing our code is increasing. So these people, if they are not writing the actual code, if they are part of a process, how are they possibly able to keep up? How can you validate that? And now if you want to get to continuous delivery, how do you have a manual process in that flow? And then is separation of duties a good control? There is a belief that if you are writing code, I'm going to make somebody mad, I can already tell on this one, right? That if you are writing code, that you can't deploy code. And this is tied again to the manual piece, but there's a distinction here. And the reason is, you want to make sure that you have two sets of eyes on your system. In most companies, this is kind of like the two key, I want to launch like a weapon or something along those lines. So in most companies, the people that are entrusted with production have been there for a few years. In a lot of cases, they don't sit very far from the people that are writing the code. They probably have worked together for years. They probably have families that know each other. They probably go out and go drinking. Now, from an auditability perspective, they don't report to the same person, so this is perfectly fine. But the reality is, one bad day, Gil said something, we don't like him, they're out at a bar, they get drunk. It's very easy for them to deploy it. But what happens is, we say we don't have an automated control. There's no automated control to verify the code is working. That's why we have separation of duties. Well, I actually think that there is something that you can do much earlier in the process. And this one's a little bit more on the dev side. It's an example where you provide, whether it's a pull request, not necessarily a code review, but you have really early on that there are multiple eyes that are touching something. So you can really address and make sure that, hey, we know somebody else is looking. Because what you really want to do is make it more difficult for a person to collude and to have any malintent. But the reality is, having that separation of duties doesn't necessarily make that happen. And the challenge is, maybe, I think there was a joke there that I missed, but that's okay. Maybe it's good. But the reality is, in the separation of duties, that this is also an artifact of some of the things that we have built over the years at a lot of these institutions. And there's a context I think people should have when having the conversation about how do we get out of this. We built teams to deploy code into production. We did that because we lacked the tools, we lacked the process, whatever reason it was in the past. Well, these teams also have protection about how they're deploying their code, their jobs. They also are the ones that we often call when there are issues in the middle of the night. From a security perspective, there are people that they're on the hook to make sure that things are working. So I think that there's an approach when having a conversation around separation of duties. But the idea itself that having that separation of duties as part of your process, that I have to have somebody else click that button so it goes into production versus making sure that you're baking this all the way, is a fallacy. I think the continuous delivery, now the way that I had defined it, I know I didn't give you a great definition other than to more quickly, more predictably, and more reliably deliver code, or with more quality, deliver code into production by automating the processes. I think it actually enables regulation. And in fact, I think that there's a lot of cases where we really can't do it without. And the problem isn't that when I sit and I talk to security, or I talk to our data teams, or I talk to our networking teams, it isn't that they say they don't want to do this, they don't agree. Right? And I look around and make some comments, like some people sometimes kind of wish, they do. They want to be a part of this. The problem is the way that we're approaching it and the way that we're having the conversation. By automating as much as we can, forget the continuous delivery that code will get into production, right? We can have a conversation and say code will get into production. Don't start there. Start, we're automating each step. If we're automating each step and taking away that silo, what you end up doing is you reduce the chances for there to be a breakdown. And so focus on the problem that you're actually solving. We want to actually reduce a breakdown. It's not about enabling a developer to get code out into production so we can test really quickly, although it is. That's one of the expectations that we have. But the reality is we want to reduce the breakdowns that we have so we can be more compliant. When approaching it in that way, the regulators are happy, auditors are happy, the people with whom you're working, who their jobs on the line are happy. You're able to make a bit more headway when it comes to automating and reducing some of the silos. Removing manual steps. This one, we have to be honest. And there's a lot of tough conversations on this one where manual steps are dangerous. Manual steps are put in place. We have a compensating control. Everyone always passes their audits. Not everyone passes their audits. But you will pass their audits, and you ultimately put in a line and say, well, the way that we do this is a different person on a different team comes in, checks the box, looks at this, and this is how we feel comfortable that we're in good shape. But if we turn it around and we actually challenge those controls, and this is difficult, I know what I'm asking because we don't want to open up a massive can of worms, but I think it is something that we really need to do, say, actually, that isn't a good control. And that control may not work. Don't do it for all of them during PCI compliance. I don't want everybody here to I can't do any other work, now I have to do all this crap. But the reality is, if we're looking at it differently, we're actually making it easier for us to be auditable. We're making it easier to be compliant. And again, if you were to ask your CISO, they would say, oh, I love the idea of continuous delivery because it is audible, it is repeatable. It doesn't change. Many times I deploy code, it's immutable. And then replacing the weak human processes. When we have separation of duties, when we rely on things like code reviews, just a code review to make it work, when we have people that have to come in and eye and walk through different flows, we're not secure. And we're not just secure, we're not compliant. If we frame the conversation, particularly in the separation of duties, we want to make sure that we don't have to worry when something gets to production, that we don't want to have to worry about having to have a compensating control, but we want to make sure earlier in the process that we do not have any of those failures. The conversation shifts. And the reason why I walk through these three is that there's a lot of things that have to be done within continuous delivery. There's a lot of steps when it comes to how you are provisioning your systems, how you are writing your code, how you're deploying your code, your pipelines when you're building. We all talk about this constantly. Chef, Docker, we talk about all of these things. But at the end of the day, if we focus on the problem that we're solving, because these are the walls that I'm hitting constantly, if you focus on the problems that you are solving for compliance and look at it through that lens, the conversation becomes easier. I believe the conversation has become easier for us. I know it's become easier for me in other places where I've been. But I still run into these sorts of blockers where I believe, and again as being provocative, that I believe that they are not really making us more secure, but they certainly are making it more difficult for us in a regulated environment to deploy our code continuously. Thank you, which I can't click to. I think it's time to get. That's what I had. Thank you very much.